Haunting facts about the Titanic. No matter how old you are or where you come from, you have probably heard of the accident of the Titanic. Touted as the unsinkable ship, the Titanic would make headlines around the world after it crashed into an iceberg in 1912. The luxury ship had over 1,000 passengers aboard when an iceberg tore through its hull. Only 700 passengers survived the accident, and ever since, the Titanic has been a source of great interest for the general public. Number 10. Not enough lifeboats. With the Titanic being as massive as it was, you would have expected many lifeboats to have been kept aboard in case of an emergency. However, due to two issues, the Titanic only had enough lifeboats to hold 1/3 of the ship's total occupancy. The first reason the Titanic lacked enough lifeboats was due to a loophole in ship regulation at the time. The British Board of Trade wrote a law in 1886 regulating the number of lifeboats a ship should carry before setting out into the ocean. Unfortunately, this law only affected vessels weighing up to 10,000 tons. Since the Titanic came in at an astonishing 46,000 tons, no one enforced the law onto the Titanic. This loophole allowed the company building the Titanic to reduce the number of lifeboats to their liking. Since no one was enforcing the Titanic to hold a certain amount of lifeboats, the company decided to use the space lifeboats took up for other reasons. They created a larger area for passengers to enjoy, including a large area free of lifeboats for the first-class passengers to lounge around. If the company creating the Titanic had kept with the initial design that left enough room for 64 lifeboats, the number of survivors could have been much higher. Number 9. Coal fire. Everyone points to an iceberg as the primary reason the Titanic is sitting at the bottom of the ocean. However, recent findings have opened up new theories that an iceberg may not have been solely responsible for the sinking of the Titanic. In 2017, a researcher discovered never-before-seen photographs taken during the construction of the Titanic. In one photo, a massive black mark ran across the hull of the ship. Engineers in London concluded that the mark was due to a fire in one of the coal bunkers of the ship. After more research, some believed that the coal fire weakened the ship's hull, allowing the iceberg to pierce the outside of the vessel more easily. While this new evidence has sparked renewed interest in the sinking of the Titanic, not everyone in the academic community is convinced. Some historians say that no matter what damage the fire caused, the iceberg opened too many compartments for the ship to remain afloat. Number 8. Last remaining survivor. Of the 1,317 passengers that embarked on the Titanic's maiden voyage, only 706 survived the horrific accident. Over the years, the number of people who survived the accident has slowly dwindled. It wasn't until 2009 that the last remaining survivor passed. Milvina Dean was only a baby when her family walked onto the Titanic in 1912. She has credited her father as the reason her family survived the sinking of the Titanic. Shortly after he heard the scraping of the iceberg along the hull, he rushed his family from their third-class quarters to nearby lifeboats. Dean's family was leaving on the Titanic in the hopes of starting a new life in the United States. However, after surviving the accident, her family returned to England, where they lived out the rest of their lives. Number 7. Musicians on board. As with most ships during the early 1900s, the Titanic employed a small band to entertain its passengers during the long trip across the Atlantic. However, unlike almost any other band in history, the band on the Titanic were truly dedicated to their jobs. These musicians played during tea time, dinner, and other occasions. A book containing over 300 songs were given to every first-class passenger when they arrived on the ship. The group of musicians was expected to know every song in the book in case any first-class passenger would request it to be played. You may expect the musicians to stop playing once the Titanic hit an iceberg and began to sink. However, the group of 8 musicians continued to play as the ship sank into the ocean. People believe that the musicians continued to play to help calm the nerves of the passengers as they boarded lifeboats to safety. All of the 8 musicians went down with the ship. Only 3 of the musicians' bodies were ever found after the accident. In 1912, a memorial concert was held in honor of the musicians who played during the Titanic accident. Number 6. Drunk Chief Baker. While over 700 people survived the sinking of the Titanic, one story stands out above them all. Charles John Jowen was the chief baker on the Titanic during its maiden voyage and is one of the most famous survivors of the Titanic. Charles was in his sleeping quarters when the Titanic first struck the iceberg. He instantly woke up and started to help with getting passengers onto the lifeboats. At one point, passengers began to run away from the lifeboats, thinking that staying on the sinking ship would be safer. Charles started to grab and throw these passengers into the lifeboat to get them to safety. After the lifeboat lifeboat was filled, he went back to his quarters and started to drink. He then rushed to the back of the Titanic, which was now standing tall out of the water, and rowed the ship into the ocean, becoming the last survivor to leave the Titanic. He paddled in water for over 2 hours. Unlike some of the other passengers who died, Charles was able to survive with almost no effects from the frigid water. Many believe he was able to withstand the freezing water thanks to the alcohol he drank during the sinking of the Titanic. Number 5. Finally found. Even though the Titanic is one of the most famous ship accidents in history, the remains of the ship stayed hidden for decades after its encounter with an iceberg. It wasn't until 1985 when an oceanographer, Robert Ballard, finally found the Titanic. While Ballard had attempted to find the Titanic in 1977, he wasn't successful until 1985 after he received funding from the U.S. Navy. To obtain the proper financing, Ballard had to find 2 Cold War-era submarines for the U.S. Navy. After he discovered these 2 vessels, the Navy allowed him to use the underwater robots they issued to him to find the Titanic. On September 1st, Ballard and a French expedition finally discovered the first debris of the Titanic. Ever since Ballard's first discovery, people have been diving to the Titanic, collecting artifacts that help slowly piece together its final moments. Number 4. Luxury for all. The designers of the Titanic put luxury above all else during its construction. However, what most people don't know is that many of the luxuries for first-class passengers were available to third-class passengers as well. The Titanic was one of a kind when it came to amenities available to its first-class passengers. It was one of the first ships to offer a heated swimming pool, Turkish baths, and a full gym. The first-class living and lounging areas had carved solid oak wood paneling that decorated every wall. The second-class area was very similar to the first class. The third-class area of the Titanic was something very different. Many of the third-class passengers were travelers who were moving to America for the first time. While the company that built the Titanic still cared about these passengers, they did reduce some of the luxuries seen throughout the rest of the ship. Rooms for third-class passengers were smaller than their second and first-class counterparts. Certain amenities, such as the Turkish bath, were reduced since the designers did not expect third-class passengers to use them as much. However, the third-class areas still contained oak decoration, luxury chairs, and many other luxuries passengers may not have been accustomed to experiencing. Overall, no matter what class you purchased your ticket in, you would have had a luxurious time. Number 3. Mail ship. If you have ever researched anything about the Titanic, you may have noticed 3 letters, RMS, placed in front of the vessel's name. These 3 letters stand for the Royal Mail Ship, which made the Titanic a mail cargo ship. Located on Deck G, the Titanic had a dedicated area for sorting mail and parcels called the Sea Post Service. The workers in this post office worked for both the Royal Mail and the United States Post Office. These mailmen would work 7 days a week, sorting over 60,000 items every day over a 13-hour shift. Since the post office room was located below the waterline of the Titanic, the room quickly flooded after the Titanic struck an iceberg. The post office workers sprang into action, working as hard as they could to save the mail and packages aboard. Unfortunately, none of the 3,423 sacks of mail survived, and to this day, no one has been able to find any of the parcels that sunk with the Titanic. Number 2. Poor design. When the Titanic was first announced, the company behind its design touted that it was unsinkable. However, due to a design flaw in the hull of the Titanic, the ship was capable of taking on a lot of water at once without any safety measures to save itself. The Titanic's construction included 16 quote-unquote watertight compartments. These compartments were meant to prevent water from spreading throughout the ship in case of a breach in the hull. However, since the passengers of the Titanic would want to move around freely throughout the ship, the designers were forced to place doors into the bulkheads that were meant to keep water out. Once the Titanic struck an iceberg, it opened up a handful of compartments to the sea outside. Since the doors placed into the bulkheads were not strong enough to hold back water, the water quickly spread throughout the ship. These non-watertight compartments are one of the most significant reasons the Titanic sank so quickly after its collision. Number 1. Quickly disappearing. When most ships sink into the ocean, they begin to take on a whole new life. They become home to dozens of sea life and can act as a living reef to some ocean species. Some shipwrecks are home to microbes that slowly eat away at the wood or iron that comprise the sunken vessel. The Titanic is no special ship when it comes to hungry creatures of the sea. When the Titanic was first found, researchers were astonished at its almost pristine condition after its wreck. Many attributed this preservation due to the extreme pressures and lack of light that surround the vessel. However, only a few decades after its initial discovery, the Titanic is slowly disappearing. In 2010, scientists discovered a new species of bacteria living in and around the wreckage of the Titanic. At its current rate of decay, many scientists believe that the Titanic will not last more than 15 to 20 years. Thanks to everyone for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to learn something new every day. Before you go, let us know down in the comments if you learned something new from this video.